Welcome back to the Yellow Room Podcast, where it's all about positivity and empowering you to become the very best version of yourself. I'm Nika, the host of this podcast, and I'm so ecstatic that you tuned in for yet another powerful topic intended to empower you. Thank you. Before we get into today's episode, I want you all to hear from one of our fellow Yellow Room family members about how this podcast has been life-changing for her.
I look forward to my weekly dose of the Yellow Room podcast religiously. Nika reminds me of just how powerful it is to be a woman, and her message always motivates me to push towards my highest potential. I highly recommend tuning into this podcast. It'll change your perspective and it'll change your life.
I want to say that if you're in the DMV area, you need to clear your calendars for December 14th. We are going to have a blast. Yes, you're going to have a blast. On December the 14th, I will be having an event called 2020 Vision, the Mastermind. It's going to be the ultimate planning party. And if you're wondering if you should attend, well, ask yourself these two questions. Are you ready to be serious about your goals in 2020? If you answered yes, then okay. Next question. Do you like to have fun? I would assume that you all love to have fun. We aren't boring people. So you're going to answer yes to that question. So guess what? You need to be there. It will be in Fredericksburg, Virginia, which is in the middle of, it's in between Richmond and DC. So if you're in either location, make your way there. There are limited tickets being sold. They are going pretty fast. So if you are interested and you are serious about really unleashing your full potential in 2020, you need to be there. You can purchase your tickets now at nikaspeaks.com/events-1. I know that might be a little too much, but you can head over to my Instagram page. The link is in my bio. If you're a little unclear as to what a mastermind is, it's essentially like a peer-to-peer group session where you bounce ideas off of one another, right? So I'll give you an example. Let's say person A, they come in and they let us know that one of their goals in 2020 is to be a first-time homeowner. Let's say person B, and let me add, person A is a financial advisor as well. Let's say person B is a real estate agent and one of her goals for 2020 is to become debt-free, right? As we're all working together and really brainstorming and really writing out our action items to accomplish our goals, we're also helping each other at the same time. It's a magical exchange. It's beautiful. Like, you need to be there. So guess what? Person A and B, they have two totally different backgrounds, but guess what? They can now connect and help one another. The realtor, she can go ahead and give the financial advisor all of the tools and all of the steps that she needs to take in buying her first home. And guess what? The real estate agent who now wants to become debt-free, she can go ahead and link up with the financial advisor, and the financial advisor can help her write out a plan so that she can become debt-free. I know that was a bit much, but guess what? You need to be there. It's not going to be your typical, little vision board party and you're going to walk away like on a high and then the next day you're just feeling blah again. Like, no, you're going to leave with actual action items and we're all going to hold each other accountable. So I can't wait to see you there. Hello, Yellow Room family. I so sincerely apologize for not producing any episodes over the past 2 weeks. The first week was actually planned. I was on vacation. I was in Jamaica. It was amazing. However, while I was in Jamaica, in between me coming back home, as you can imagine, it was super hot in Jamaica, and then I came home and it was cold. And so I think that somewhere in between me leaving Jamaica and me getting home, getting adjusted back to the cold weather, I had a horrible cold, and my voice is still a little raspy from that cold, but I just was not feeling good, and I refused to try to put together some crappy content and try to pretend like I was all in and I was feeling it. But the good news is I'm back. I'm feeling great. I'm finally getting back to myself, and I'm so excited to bring this new episode to you all today. So this episode is, I would say that it's more so like a bonus episode. So it's something that I actually did in the first season of this podcast. It's called Questions That Need Answers. So if you all follow me on social media, in particular Instagram, you know that I'm really big on engaging with my followers and my audience base and really trying to get your feedback, hear your ideas, your thoughts, anything in particular that you want to hear from me or want to hear more about. So I did a little survey, I guess you can call it a survey, and I asked you all what you would like to hear more of in this episode of Questions That Need Answers. And I received quite a few responses, well, a lot of responses. And I knew that realistically, I could not answer each one individually, especially in one episode. So what I did was I went ahead and bucketed the questions by category. So many of them were around like career changes, whether you wanted to leave your particular department and explore a new role in another department, whether you wanted to change your career like altogether. Some people had inquired about they're currently working full time, but they may be getting a master's part time or finishing another degree part time. That's kind of like steering them to change their career totally, like going in a different direction. So that's how I got to the bucket of how do I change my career completely. Even if you are staying at the same company, I'm pretty sure that if you're going to a different department, there's new objectives, there's new goals. Yes, you all have one ultimate vision and one ultimate goal if you're at that same company, but that's why I kind of grouped that in there. And then I received a lot of feedback on wanting to hear more about the topic of mentorship and how to kind of how to go about selecting a great mentor. And so that's how I got to the category of how to find a mentor. Some people mentioned that they have current mentors, but they don't feel like they're getting the development that's necessary, or it's kind of like a one-way exchange. That person, their current mentor, may be always like just telling them about their self and not really taking the time to pour into the mentee the way that they should. So that's how I arrived at the category of finding a good mentor, because it sounds like if that's your current situation as well, you may need to start with a clean slate with getting new mentors. And then the last category that I landed on was self-doubt. And so I actually had quite a few shockingly numerous responses around this topic of self-doubt, and it really made me stop and really reflect on myself, if I could be quite honest. But this is something that I think if you haven't already experienced, you someday will experience this whole obstacle of self-doubt, like doubting yourself. I mean, this can originate from a number of things. It could be your upbringing. Maybe you weren't raised in a life-giving household, and you maybe did not see an example of people speaking life into you. Rather, maybe it was just all negative things, or kind of like pointing out your weaknesses, or having someone to tell you all the reasons why you cannot be something or achieve something. And so that was a little heartbreaking to me to see how many people actually struggle with self-doubt. And so I automatically said, oh, I'm hitting this head on. Like, I have to talk about it because it's something that I've had to deal with. And sometimes I still do get those self-limiting thoughts, but I have created rituals around how to navigate through those negative thoughts. Like, negative thoughts are inevitable. And if you have relations with, family members, friendships, if you're with a significant other, there's going to be a point in time where you experience someone saying something that is against whatever it is that you're after. And in return, those negative comments will have you essentially doing a double take and really, questioning whether there is validity in their statements and those negative thoughts. And so that will send you down a dark path of kind of talking yourself out of greatness. And I know that all too well. And so that's how I arrived at the question of, how do you overcome self-doubt? So with all of that, I really do hope that you have some valuable takeaways from this bonus episode. If it is valuable to you, please do me a favor and share with someone whom you think will also find it valuable. Thank you for tuning in today. Let's talk about mentorship and how to find a good mentor. Well, actually, I will say good mentors, because that needs to be a plural. And I say that because I believe that it's best to have a network of different types of mentors, because you need role models essentially for different areas of your life. Me, myself, I have actually 3 different mentors and a pending mentor. And so I have a mentor, a financial mentor. So this is someone whom I aspire to be and who I think has set a great, exceptional example of what it means to really go after financial independence. And just by me observing their life and their lifestyle before I even reached out to them to be my mentor, this was a person who kind of taught me that retirement is not an age. Society tells us that retirement is an age, but it's really not. It's about your financial health. It's about your ability to produce wealth, and really be financially independent of having to go to a 9-to-5 every single day. And there's so much more on that, but that's just an example of how I really sought after this particular person to be my mentor when it comes to finances. I have also a spiritual mentor. So this is someone who I can confide in and go to, around my spiritual growth. So someone I aspire to be as far as my prayer life, my understanding and my learning of the word, someone who's really set a great example on what it really means to be a servant leader, in the church, in the marketplace, in their work. But really, this person is just a light. I just think that they're a light in a dark world, if I could make it any more simpler than that. My third mentor is my career mentor, and I actually have maybe 2 or 3 career mentors, but to fit into my career bucket of mentorship. And so these are people who I sought after to be mentors because of the great example of leadership and just the depth of knowledge that they have in the company. And I just respected them in so many ways of how they carry themselves and how they really stood out as individuals. Like, I think a lot of times, especially if you work at a big corporation, a lot of times upper management can look like a cult. So it's like all of them, like not all of them, but some of them have pretty much lost themselves in the midst of the corporate culture. So these are people who I feel like have done an exceptional job at remaining themselves despite their title and really caring for people and just being all around great people in and out of the workplace. I said I had a pending mentor because there is currently a woman who I plan to reach out to very soon to ask to be my mentor in the area of my marriage. So I'm a newlywed. As much as I like to think I know everything, I don't. And so I really want to make sure that this is my one and only marriage. So this particular woman has been married for over 40 years. So I aspire to be married that long and have a healthy marriage at that. And so I'll be reaching out to her to help me, like give me some pointers. Just, carry on conversations with them, share different experiences. And so she can give me feedback. Like, was that a right judgment call? Was that not a right judgment call? But really pouring into me so that I can be the best wife that I can be. But the first step in really finding great mentors is first knowing yourself. I think a lot of people get caught up in like idolizing people and not really taking the time to get to know them, but furthermore, not taking the time to get to know yourself. So you need to think of mentorship like any relationship, right? Or friendship. You need to know what you bring to the table and what you're lacking. So key here is knowing and being honest with yourself about your strengths and weaknesses. Mentorship is a two-way thing. And from the responses I received around the survey for this episode, a lot of people are experiencing a one-sided mentorship, but it should be like an equal exchange. Just as much as your mentor should be pouring into you, you also should be pouring into them. And you can do that by leveraging your strengths. So you need to be honest with yourself. Have a meeting with yourself. I know that sounds crazy, but I have business meetings with myself all the time. And I just have a real conversation with myself, not aloud, but in my head. And I journal and write things down that come to mind. So really making a list of your strengths and knowing how you can take those things and pour into your mentor. But you also need to be honest with yourself and really list out your weaknesses. Your weaknesses will determine and help you identify ways in which you can identify a great role model to help you in those areas, because there's opportunity for growth, obviously. And so that's really the first step. And before you even ask someone to be your mentors, you have to know yourself first, and you have to be honest about the things you're good at and the things that you're not so great at. The second thing is you really need to reflect on who to reach out to. So after you have done step one and you really kind of assess yourself, like assess your inventory of weaknesses and strengths, you then need to ask yourself, who do you want to be like? And for an example, we're growing up, we go to, let's say in lieu of the holiday season approaching, let's say it's Thanksgiving dinner, all the little kids are there, you're, let's say 8 years old, and, aunt or uncle ask you while you're having Thanksgiving dinner, what do you want to be when you grow up? And, we had all of these wild, crazy dreams. But, as you get older, you start to mature, you understand the world better, you explore yourself a little more, you start to really know what you really want in life. That question should kind of transition into, who do you want to be like? And I'm not saying like you're to be a clone of any other person on this earth. No, like we're all unique in our own ways. But when you really sit down with yourself and you think about the person who you want to be, who comes to mind when you think of yourself at your greatest level? Like, you have to have someone in mind who's set the standard or a standard for what it is that you're trying to accomplish. I know me, myself, I'm trying to get debt free, like in the next year. Like, I know for me, that's a very, very, very ambitious goal, but I just know that when I bring a child into this world, like, I want to be able to have an abundance of freedom in my finances. And so there's a particular person in mind. Again, I said I had a financial mentor that I see that they don't have car payments. They don't finance things. They have 2 children and they can travel all around the world whenever they want with their kids. Like, they're well traveled. And I mean, it's just it's other things too that I look up to this person for, but that's just an example. And so I just think that, speaking to that, you're not going to find everything you need, or you're not going to find just one person to kind of help you grow in your areas of weaknesses or opportunities. So that's why I said it's good to have a network of mentors. So you want people who can really be like expert, like, what am I trying to say? Experts in whatever area or aspect of life that you're trying to, achieve more or achieve goals in. Lastly, I would say connect with courage. And what I mean by that is kind of finding out before you have let's say you have a person in mind, before you kind of like, I guess, cold call someone and ask them to be your mentor, right? You need to make sure that you've done your research on them. Like, you need to know what their majors were in college. You need to know their, significant achievements as well as their setbacks and failures. But you really need to make sure before you ask someone to be your mentor that you have a clear, solidified understanding of who they are, what they stand for, what they're doing, and where they're going. Because I've had it where I've reached out to someone, after having a few meetings and really get to know them, and I'm reaching out, asking them to be my mentor. I've had people to say, like, of course, they're excited, they're honored to, be able to pour into you. But a lot of people are curious as to why you've asked them to be, you've asked them to be your mentor. And it'll be quite embarrassing if you can't answer that question. Like, you don't want to have an empty conversation or empty answer around why you want that person to be your mentor for whatever reason. So you really need to make sure you have a sound understanding of who they are and what they stand for. For me, I am very much so an extrovert, but I'm also, I consider myself to be an introverted extrovert. So I say all that to say I'm selective of who I'm an extrovert with. And I know a lot of times I can get very socially awkward when it comes to like asking someone to go to lunch with me, or, if I can stop by their office, because I don't know, deep down inside or in the back of my head, I just feel like a creep. But what I started to do, I created a ritual around like kind of shaking off that awkwardness and asking someone to be my mentor. So I told you all I have a pending request for someone to be like my marriage mentor. I have not reached out to her just yet. I know her. We know each other pretty well, but I don't know why I'm afraid to just ask her. And so I sometimes build up the courage to go and talk to her in person. And then I'm like, oh no, like I'll do it tomorrow. And so what I've actually started to do is really write out a list. For me, I'm a very like hands-on do it type of person, but I kind of like reflected and I guess journaled all of the reasons why I look up to her as a wife and a mother and just a leader in all that she does. And so that kind of like that whole ritual, I guess, kind of like eases any like anxieties or worries that I have around just walking up to her, asking her to be my mentor. So, in a nutshell, that is how you find a good mentor, or good mentors, as I should say, because you should have more than one. I'll be right back after this message. Hello, Yellow Room family. Today's episode was brought to you by Anchor. I chose Anchor as my podcast host because it is, in fact, the easiest way to make a podcast. Anchor gives me everything I need in one place for free, which you can use right from your phone or computer. In fact, this episode was created and edited right from my mobile device. Anchor's creation tools allow me to record and edit my podcast on the go to make it sound great. They even distributed my podcast for me so that it can be heard on all platforms, to include Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many more. You can easily make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. For more information, download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Let's talk about overcoming self-doubt and how you can overcome self-doubt. This thing that we can't seem to escape, and no matter how hard we try to apply any feedback or takeaways, it somehow creeps back into our life. I want to start this by saying one of my most favorite quotes that relate to self-doubt. And that is, when you doubt your power, you give power to your doubt. Like, let me repeat that. When you doubt your power, you give power to your doubt. It's simply amazing what we can do when we start actually believing in ourselves. And I previously mentioned that, some of us deal with self-doubt for many different reasons. Maybe your parents were narcissists, or maybe you found yourself in a relationship with a narcissist. So you're kind of accustomed, it's your norm to hear these negative things about yourself, and you allow those things to eventually shape you and define you. So this, as I was kind of like thinking about what I wanted to say around this topic and how to really deal with self-doubt, I started to reflect on a conversation that I previously had with this random guy, actually. It was maybe a year or so back, but I happened to be in a restaurant alone. It was one of those times where it's like, oh, I'm going to go on a date by myself, and I just felt awkward. So I started to make random conversation with this guy that was sitting across from me. And for whatever reason, I feel like people just, and this is not a bad thing, but people, it's like they find comfort in just becoming this diary when it comes to talking to me. Like, I'll know someone's whole life story within the first 5 minutes of them meeting me. And so this guy, he appeared to be a very well-established, well-off guy. And he said to me, you wouldn't believe my life story if I told you. And, I like to talk. I was like, I want to hear it. Like, what's your story? Like, who are you? And he's a older guy, I could tell. But he began to share how he was a convicted felon twice, and how he had spent I think it was 12 years of his life in prison. But prior to him telling me about how he ended up in prison, he told me that he was a psychologist. And a clinical psychologist. And I remember thinking to myself, which I probably shouldn't have judged him by, I remember thinking to myself, wait, how are you a clinical psychologist and you just told me that you are a convicted felon and you spent 12 years in prison? And so I then became really intrigued by, like, okay, I want to hear your story. I want to hear more. I need to hear more. And so he started to tell me how he was a drug addict for over half of his life. And it was really getting the best of him, where to the point where he was like selling assets, just for a little amount of drugs. I don't know what I don't know what drug he was using. I don't know what he was referring to, but anyway, he pretty much was willing to give up all of these things in order for him to have this temporary high. And so he ended up finding himself in a lot of trouble, and he was in prison for those 12 years. And he said that he could recall, there being no hope or no re-entrance into society after he served his sentence. And so he said he came out. Of course, he's a convicted felon. He knew that there would be a hard time for him to really find stable employment. So he said he signed up for school. He applied for school. To his surprise, he got in, and he actually found that he was good at it. He was majoring in psychology in a local college. And he said prior to him getting out, he would feed off of his own self-limiting thoughts and beliefs, but he found himself in a new state of mind when he was in undergrad. He said that he started to thrive off of positive reinforcement from his peers and his professors, because though he was in the moment and though he was obtaining his degree, he still was not believing in himself. So he said he would spend countless hours in office hours really picking his professor's brains and really trying to get that praise that he was longing for, that he wished he could provide for himself. And so he said it came around to his senior year, and one of his toughest professors, the professor that gave him the run for his money, right? He said it was close to time for finals, and his professor walked down the aisle where he was sitting, and he laid a piece of paper, turned it over and laid it on his desk. And he said that he had just recently submitted a paper, but he's like, I know it's not a paper because that paper was 10 pages long. This was a singular piece of paper that this guy laid down on his desk. So he's like, he was afraid to turn it over. He turned it over, and it was an application for a graduate degree, a master's in psychology. He said he immediately started to cry because he did this whole college thing just because he felt like there was nothing else for him to do. And he said he had been transparent about, his journey, his time in prison with his peers and his professors. And they all were very motivated and inspired by how he was really trying to change his life around. So he went on to get his graduate degree, and then he got his doctorate degree. And so now he practices as a clinical psychologist. And there was so much more that was shared, but though that's a high level overview of our conversation. But I remember walking away feeling bad for one, judging him in the first place, but even thinking to myself, wow, I have not physically been imprisoned. However, you don't have to physically be in prison to be imprisoned by your own negative thoughts. And so I started to really think about all of the things and times that I've allowed my own negative thoughts and views of myself to hold me captive. And I'm like, wow, this man physically spent 12 years behind bars, but yet I haven't had that same experience, but I've allowed, limiting thoughts to imprison me. And so I just wanted to provide you all with some takeaways from that encounter with this guy that I met, and also from my own experiences with navigating and overcoming self-doubt. The first takeaway is that I feel like society has taught us and engraved in us that a person's successful recovery shouldn't be, well, I guess it should be attributed to some miracle. So let's talk about this guy I met. So if society tells us that, oh, that's a one-off situation and, that was just the miraculous, that's not the narrative for the typical felon, right? Like re-entering society. When in fact, we shouldn't be attributing his turnaround to a miracle, but yet attributing it to one, God's grace, and his hard work and perseverance to turn things around. Like, he himself did that. It was not a miracle. It was a shift in his mindset. The second takeaway is that regaining belief in yourself gives you the power to change the direction of your life. When he started to see crystal clear that he didn't have to be defined by his past failures, he started to work a little bit harder, and he started to see the world through a different lens. Had he kept that, imprisoned mindset and thinking that, oh, like there's no hope for me, I can't have a successful entrance back into society, his actions would have aligned with that imprisonment mindset. Another thing is that, and I know it's so cliche, but your past does not have to define your future. We, like all of us, we have two choices. We can allow our past to define us, right? That's what we don't want to happen. Or we can allow our past to refine us. So maybe you don't have an experience as extreme as this man of being in prison for 12 years, but maybe there are generational curses that you've set out to break, right? But because of what you've seen, because no one has really set an example for you, right? It seems unattainable. So you tell yourself, I'm crazy for thinking I can change things around. Who am I to say that I'm going to be the first person in my family to do this? Who am I to say that I'm going to be the first person in my family to really build wealth, generational wealth? Who am I to tell myself that I'm going to be a phenomenal entrepreneur? Like, these are things that I have actually told myself. And so we can't allow our past experiences or failures to navigate us, because if we do allow it to navigate us, guess what we'll end up? The place that we said we didn't want to. Let's talk about how to change career paths. So I have been with my company going on 4 years. And while this has been my only post-undergrad job, I have had 4 different positions. And although I've been working for the same company, it's a large company. There are many different moving parts under this roof. However, all of my roles have been completely different, affording me completely different experiences and opportunities. So although I have not left the company, I do feel like sometimes I work for a totally different company based on my role that I have within the company. And I honestly and initially felt bad for switching like my job roles, although they've been like promotional, like, I may receive salary increases along the way, or it would make sense to take this step in getting this role. But I did sometimes feel like I was being a disloyal associate, if I could be quite honest. So a lot of people are always saying that, millennials, they aren't loyal. They take the next best thing or whatever. In many ways, that could be true for me. However, I knew that there were things that I wasn't willing to sacrifice for a job, right? And so I tried to, in instances where I did have to move along, I tried to give the role a chance, give management a chance to make things better for me. However, they just didn't change, and I was not willing to be miserable, if I could be honest. And I remember having a conversation with my mentor, my career mentor, telling her how, like, I felt like, on my resume, I felt like if a hiring manager was looking at my resume, they would feel like, oh, I'm just job hopping. And she's like, no, you have the wrong perspective. It's not like you're making dumb moves. Like, your moves actually make sense. And as long as you can back why you've made these changes, you'll be fine. And she said something to me that really put everything in perspective for me. She said that there is no final draft of your life, right? So when she said this, she said, there's no final draft to your life. You have to keep revising your life. And she said, this is not only applicable in the workplace, but this can be applied in all areas of your life. And I suddenly felt much better. But then again, I was like, well, I remember writing papers and stuff in college, and it's like, they would keep telling you, oh, this is draft 1, draft 2, draft 3. And I always felt like, well, my paper won't ever be perfect. Like, why do I have to keep making these revisions? And I remember I would get 97s, 98s, 99s on my papers, and I would legit be mad because I'm like, I spent X amount of time revising this. I took your feedback, and it's still not a 100. And so at that moment, I was like, wow, well, is she saying that, in the area of my career, is she saying that no matter, what job I go to, if I decide to leave the company, what department I go to, if I get this promotion, is she saying that it'll never be perfect? And I had to really tell myself, nothing in life is perfect. Yes, you can make a better move, but you have to kind of look forward to the imperfections and the flaws and not get so caught up in, the highlight reel of this job, thinking of it as a shiny object, oh, if I just get that, then every negative thing or every negative experience will just go out the window and everything's just going to be sunshine and rainbows. Absolutely not. So that leads me to my first point when making a change or shift in your career. And that's really making sure you really want it, right? Like I said, nothing in life is ever 100% perfect. So you really have to think things through before you really, step out and try something new. You have to really know yourself. And I've said this before in this episode under another category topic, but you really have to know yourself. You have to know what makes you happy, what keeps you up at night, what motivates you. And surprisingly, I've asked people randomly, what motivates them. And I would say 80% of the time, people say money. But I would challenge you that your motivation is deeper than money. If that were the case, then why is it that CEOs, they're the top paid people in companies, why is it that they're miserable, right? It has to be something else. There has to be another underlying motive, like deep down inside, that keeps you going? What keeps you going when your alarm goes off in the morning, right? That's like the worst time of day for me, when my alarm goes off, right? It's not even a matter of, I know that I get compensated well, but when that alarm goes off, that compensation goes out the window. I'm like, I'm tired. I don't want to do it. But then I automatically think about the difference that I get to make in people's lives in the day ahead. And that's what gets me out of bed. I think about the team that I get to work with. They're so smart. They're talented. They're genuine. Those are the things that motivate me. And even if I like have this inclination, like, oh, I could just call out, I can use PTO, I instantly feel bad because I love my team. And I'm like, okay, if I don't go to work, I'm leaving them hanging. Someone's going to have to pick up my slack. Someone's going to have to do the things that I'm supposed to do today. So I genuinely feel bad. So those are the things that motivate me. But you really want to know, and actually just make a list. I'm a list person, if you all haven't picked up on it already. But really make a list of all the things that make you happy. And this is just not inside of work, but outside of work as well. And you need to make sure, if you're making this career switch, if this career switch will allow and align you to be happy with what you really want. Essentially, just call this list your requirements for being happy. It's something that I have started to do in the last 2 changes in my career paths in my current company, and it's worked. The second thing is you really have to think about, what are you willing to sacrifice? And this can be based off of your requirements for happy list. So it's like, out of this list, like, yes, these are all of the things that make me happy, but in reality, I may not find a role or career path that will align me perfectly for all of these things to happen in my life. So from that, you really need to think, okay, so of this list, right? These are the top things that make me happy. Of this list, what am I really willing to kind of shy away from just a little bit for the sake of this career switch? And so that'll really put things in perspective. And sometimes it will reveal to you that, hey, I thought this move would be a better move for me, but in actuality, it's not, because I'm just not willing to pass these things up. It could be work-life balance. Like, you can be thinking that, oh, I want to leave this company and go to XYZ company because they pay me way more. And if I can be honest, I had this experience where I was about to leave my company, right, and go work for this other big company because it was like a $20,000 or $30,000 salary difference, right? And so, not to say that I'm not making ends meet or I'm not financially stable in my current position in my company, because I have all that I could ever need, and most of my wants are met. Like, I have the freedom to do things, but again, it was that shiny object, like, oh, we'll give you 20 to 30,000 more, but I had to really sit back and say, okay, but at what cost? So I started asking people that I know that have worked in that job, in that company, or are currently working in that company. And I started to really find out why their turnover, because I had seen that they had such bad turnover at this particular company. But all I was thinking about was more money, right? And so these people that I reached out to were like, oh, yeah, I stayed there a year. Yeah, the pay was great, but work-life balance was horrible. I found myself working 80 hours a week, 85 hours a week. And right off the bat, I was like, no, absolutely not. When I leave work, I want to leave work. I don't want my boss texting me on a Saturday or Sunday telling me to log on, pull this report, do XYZ. No, I was not willing whatsoever to have that be my reality. So I automatically said, okay, yeah, they can say they pay you more money, but actually, if you break it down, that salary down by the hourly expectations, you're really underpaid. And I was definitely not willing to go down that path. So really assessing what you're willing to sacrifice, right? And that can come from your happiness requirements list. The third thing is discovering the capabilities of the role that you're thinking about going after. So essentially it's what's critical for being successful in this role, right? So let's say if you're thinking about switching career paths and I don't know, being like a salesperson, right? You really need to assess what makes a great salesperson. It's not a matter of, let's say, if you're thinking about joining a company and being a salesperson for a particular item that you absolutely love, right? It's not your love for this product that's going to make you a great salesperson. It's the underlying foundational, skill sets that have to be consistent, that are consistent with all salespeople, no matter what industry you're in. So if you think about it, a great salesperson, I like to think that all great salespeople, they have this whole psychology thing down. Like they can really get inside of people's heads and anticipate what they're going to say so that they can have a good comeback, or I don't know what the sales term would be called, but salespeople, for the most part, they have to be organized. They have to be leaders. They have to be great, phenomenal communicators, because they have to be great listeners, right? So you have to put in context everything with that your prospect is saying to you so that you can connect the dots and move forward in making your sale. So if you understand these foundational skill sets and you know what it takes and you think that you can, make this happen, or you think that you currently have this skill set, then maybe being a salesperson may be a right move for you. However, if you know that you're lacking in these foundational skill sets, you have to be real with yourself and go ahead and make the determination that it's probably not a best fit for you, right? And the same can go with any position. Let's say if you're wanting to switch career paths and you want to be a chef, but deep down inside you can't cook, right? It's not as simple as going on YouTube or Googling recipes or anything like that. No, anyone can do that and you can still mess up. So you have to really do your research and be honest with yourself. Can you really do this? The fourth thing is you need to talk to people who are currently in this role. And I mentioned this when I was considering leaving my company and going to another company that was going to pay me $20,000 to $30,000 more, right? When I started to reach out to people, I started to get the real deal, right? Any position is going to look like a shiny object on LinkedIn or Indeed or Glassdoor, right? Well, maybe not Glassdoor because you'll find some real reviews on there. But when you actually talk to people who are currently in that role, I consider it real-time data. They're living in the moment, right? And so you really want to know all the ins and outs, the highs and lows. And again, no job, no company will ever be 100% perfect, but you really need to ask them the questions that you would probably ask a recruiter or the person that's interviewing you, because guess what? Those recruiters and that person that's interviewing you, they have another agenda. They're advocating for their company. And not to say that the person that you reach out to get the real-time data from, not to say that they aren't advocates for their company, but you're more likely to get the real deal with them. So you really need to get real reviews of the company or position that you're considering. And from there, you need to compare it to your happiness requirements list. The last thing is it kind of reels back into the importance of having a mentor. So you need to get feedback or insight from your career mentor, or I don't know if you have another type of mentor. Some people may not want to reach out to a mentor that's in their current company, especially if your mentor is your boss, right? You may not feel comfortable with telling your boss, like, hey, I'm considering leaving the company and going XYZ. What are your thoughts? What do you think they're going to say? Like, how do you think they're going to feel? So it could be another mentor. And I also have feelings around, well, not feelings, but I have an opinion around why your mentor in your workplace should never be your boss. Not to say that you can't go to them for feedback or, just development, because your boss should be developing you and setting you on the right track to really navigate your path, your career path. But I just don't think that they should be the same person that's actually mentoring you. But maybe that can be a totally different episode, but that was just a side note. But you can, if maybe your boss is your mentor and that's just not an option for you, start to I just think that switching jobs, professions, career paths nowadays, it's never been easier. Like, we have so many resources. You can look up blogs, you can look up podcasts, YouTube video. I like to say that YouTube is YouTube University. Lord, I can't talk. YouTube University, because you can essentially find almost anything on there, like the craziest things, right? And so really seeking feedback and making sure that you're getting another perspective as to why you should be making this move. And this is not to say that people will always agree with you, and you don't always have to agree with the feedback that people give you. However, it's great to just hear an outside perspective sometimes. I hope that you all have enjoyed today's episode. Again, if it's been valuable for you, please do me a favor and share with someone who you think it will be beneficial to as well. Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in for another episode. If you are new here, please consider subscribing on whatever platform you're listening in on today. Leave me a rating, leave me a review, comment, whatever you feel that you want to do. If you already consider yourself a part of the Yellow Room family, please consider making a small monthly donation to sustain and contribute to my growing platform. No amount is too small. Donations can be made at anchor.fm/theyellowroom/support. If you are unable to, I still love you just the same. You can still support me by listening, sharing, and providing feedback. I thank you all so much, and I appreciate your continued listenership. Thank you.